And now, a Free Press debate. Does the West need a religious revival?
Take your family to church each week. Use your freedom to worship as you please.
God has always been at the center of human life.
Freedom of every person to worship God in his own way.
Can't you understand that some people don't want religion?
But over the last century, the Western world has steadily been losing our religion. Fewer than half of Americans now belong to a church, synagogue, or mosque. Less than a fifth of Western Europeans attend church regularly. In Sweden, over 75% of young people claim no religion at all. At the same time, our communities are suffering. Fewer of us are getting married and having children, and more of us are getting divorced. We're finding meaning in the culture wars, tearing ourselves apart over politics. There's an epidemic of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and addiction.
There is an economic and a cultural malaise, and once upon a time, that hole was filled with religion.
It's a crisis of meaning. But is secularism really to blame?
The woke mind virus, it takes the place of religion.
Well, I think this is a country that needs religion. It's like the glue that holds it together.
Do we need God, or are we better off without the dogma, repression, and intolerance that comes with organized religion?
And that's why religion is evil, because it can make you do evil things, believing that they are good.
Tonight, we debate.
The communities, the societies that build their lives on that faith and live by those laws tend to be happier, more prosperous.
We all want to live in a world where it's based on reality and not based on authority and dogmatism and mysticism and pseudoscience and all these things that we combat.
The absence of any kind of metaphysical guideposts and institutional religious structure does play a role in people's angst and anxiety and even despair.
It's not really about a deity or belief or anything. It's about loving thy neighbor and the golden rule and all the stuff that we've forgotten about, and that's why we're falling apart as a nation.
Does the West need a religious revival?
And now, introducing the founder and editor of the Free Press, Barry Weiss.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Austin. It is so good to be here surrounded by coders from California, product developers from California, wellness gurus from California, and crypto scammers from California. Austin really has it all. We have an amazing evening ahead, but before I get started, I need to thank an incredible organization that I have been involved with since college and that I'm so proud to have as our sponsor tonight and for this whole Freedom Debate series. And that is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Tonight's debate would not be possible without the generosity of our friends at FIRE. And if you're wondering what FIRE is, think of them, they can't say this, but I can, as the ACLU before they lost their principles. If you're here and if you're a reader of the Free Press, I imagine you are a person that believes that freedom and freedom of speech should be defended for everyone, including those you disagree with, some of whom you're going to hear on stage tonight. If that's you, then FIRE is an organization that should definitely be on your radar. At the Free Press, of course, we believe in open dialogue and in the power of persuasion, and that is the objective of tonight's debate, to persuade you. So let's get started. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That line from Proverbs has guided believers for at least the past 2,000 or so years. But for most of my life, and perhaps for many of people in this room, that line has been turned on its head. Now, the question of who inverted it is a topic that I'm sure is going to get some airtime tonight. We can't entirely blame the new atheists who dominated the American intellectual scene in the first part of this century for the death of God. For that, we need to go back to Nietzsche or Darwin or the Enlightenment. But the point is that for people of my generation, or at least for my cohort, to be an educated, sophisticated person was to declare yourself to be an atheist, or at the very least, an agnostic. If you were smart, you had books like The God Delusion, God is Not Great, and The End of Faith on your bookshelf. We listened to Christopher Hitchens when he declared that religion poisons everything. We nodded along to Dawkins when he called faith one of the world's great evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate. The thing is, eradication, or at the very least decimation, is exactly what has happened. The percentage of Americans who identify as Christian fell from 90% in 1972 to 64% in 2022, while the religiously unaffiliated, the so-called nuns, rose from 5% to 30% in the same period, at least according to Pew. The shift towards secularism has been even more pronounced across the Atlantic. Among Europeans between the ages of 16 and 29, 70% said they have never attended a religious service. But after years of decline, this trend may be starting to reverse. Just yesterday, a massive new survey from Pew found that the share of Americans identifying as Christians has, after many, many years of decline, finally started to rise again. So the question, I think, that we're trying to argue about tonight is, are we better off with or without God? One of the lessons, I think, of the past decade seems to me to be, you can kill God, but the human impulse toward faith remains. It just takes on a different form. Politics, you could argue, has become a kind of religion, with ideological and political purity replacing moral virtue. And yet, on the other hand, religion has so often been the driver of so much that is bad: discrimination, violence, and war. And perhaps more importantly, even if we concede that religion has a social utility to us, does that matter if its doctrines cannot be proven to be true? Can a movement based on a fiction ever last? So tonight we are here to debate, does the West need a religious revival? In order to know who won, in order to know who presented the better argument, we need you to tell us where you sit before we even begin on the proposition. So, you're gonna vote. You're gonna text vote 1 to the number on the screen to tell us where you stand right now. If you believe that yes, the West needs a religious revival, you're gonna text just the letter A to that number after you've texted vote 1. But if you believe that no, the West does not need a religious revival, you are gonna text the letter B. Now, while you vote and while we tabulate the votes, let me take a minute to introduce the 4 brilliant people here in Austin to debate tonight's proposition. Arguing that yes, a religious revival is exactly what's needed is Ross Douthat. Ross is a New York Times opinion columnist. Please don't hold that against him. And he's the author of countless books on this very subject. His most recent book, a New York Times bestseller, is called Believe: Why Everyone Should Be Religious. Please welcome Ross Douthat. Hi, Ross. Joining Ross is the singular Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Ayaan is an activist and a best-selling author of many books, most recently the author of Pray: Immigration, Islam, and the Erosion of Women's Rights. Ayaan is a fellow at the Hoover Institution and, of course, a former member of Dutch Parliament. Please welcome Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Thank you. Thank you.
You better be as warm for the other side, who I'm about to introduce. Arguing that no, the West does not need a religious revival is Dr. Michael Shermer. Michael is the founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine and the host of the podcast, The Michael Shermer Show. He is the author of many New York Times best-selling books on science, psychology, and faith. Please welcome Michael Shermer.
Thank you, Mary.
So happy you're here. Welcome. And last but not least, joining Michael is comedian, actor, radio personality, TV host, and best-selling author Ayaan Carolla. He currently hosts the Ayaan Carolla Show, which hosts the Guinness Book of World Records for the most downloaded podcast in a city where everyone has a podcast. That is very impressive. Please welcome Ayaan Carolla. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for being here. Okay, so I'm going to explain the rules for tonight. Each debater is going to have a 5-minute opening statement explaining their position on the motion. We're going to go Ross, Michael, Ayaan, and then Adam. Then we're going to have a minute to get into it. Hopefully it will get bloody, but let's see. These are very nice people. And last but not least, at the end of the night, you're going to vote. And the team that changes the most minds, the team that moves more audience opinion by the end of the night, that team is going to be named the winner of tonight's debate. Okay, let's look at the initial polling results. Does the West... Okay, advantage to you guys, because you only need to move a few people in this audience. So, the beginning of the night in Texas, does the West need a religious revival? 73% of you think the answer is yes, 27% no. Okay, is everybody ready? Be it resolved, the West needs a religious revival. We'll start with Ross.
No. The clock is ticking. Thank you, Barry. This is a setup. 73% and a comedian on the other side. Only a God can save us now. So let's begin where Barry left off, with the new atheists and the America of 20 years ago. I don't hold the new atheism responsible for the decline of religion in America, but I do think that the new atheism should be held accountable for the normative predictions that it made about a world without religion. Do away with faith, they argued, and the world will become a better place. Belief in God, that old North Korean dictator in the sky, literally poisoned everything. Religious fundamentalism stood in the way of scientific progress. Religious moralism stood in the way of personal liberation. Belief in an imaginary sky daddy was a source of pointless polarization. And we listened to them. We ran the experiment. You saw the numbers. You even saw the neat inflection point right around the publication of the God delusion. America in 2025 is more secular than the America of 20 years ago. Religious affiliation has declined. Fewer Americans associate with a religious tradition than at any point in our modern history. And how is it going? Is America happier? Less polarized? More inclined to understanding those with different worldviews and perspectives? More confident in scientific and academic authority? More reasonable? I think the question answers itself. Americans today are more divided, more radicalized, more prone to fanaticism and conspiracy theorizing, more likely to regard their political opponents as hateful enemies rather than mere rivals. Younger Americans, we already heard the statistics, more anxious, more depressed, struggling to form friendships and relationships, to believe in the promise of the human future. The demons are interfering with my microphone. I apologize. I won't tell you that all of these problems are caused by the ebbing of religion, but the convergence of secularization with political derangement and cultural despair is not a coincidence, comrade. Remove religious loyalties, and people pour religious energies into politics, investing partisan allegiances with more intensity than they can bear. Remove religious community and people go looking for solidarity anywhere they can find it, from the tribalism of identity politics to the paranoia of QAnon. Remove metaphysical horizons and cosmic hope from young people, and it becomes easy to fall into despair, to imagine a world where having kids is pointless because the AI or climate change apocalypse will doom us all. Of course, religion is not always a force for good. I'm sure we'll hear a lot about that tonight. But this is true of every great arena and aspect of human affairs. People commit terrible crimes in the name of politics and family and, greed and business and everything else you can imagine. You heard Richard Dawkins claim that only religion makes people do bad things thinking they're good things. Apparently, he has never been introduced to the entire history of international communism. Give me a break. But that reality doesn't mean that we should all become anarchists or abandon our children or refuse to work, and that would somehow make the world a better place. And neither does the world become magically better when you do away with religion on the theory that it has corruptions and problems and failings. It's an integral part of human nature and human society. We clearly miss its good effects. And honestly, I think my partner and I should win this debate on those grounds alone. But I am ambitious. I wish to go further. So I will add that atheism doesn't just have a predictive problem about the last 20 years of sociological trends. It also has a failed record of predictions about reality itself. Atheism predicted that the human place in the universe would appear more accidental, less plausibly attributable to any kind of higher purpose, the more we understood the universe's inner workings. Yet to the contrary, one of the great revelations of modern physics is that the universe appears exquisitely fine-tuned to produce stars, planets, life, us, a reality that has driven atheists to postulate a near infinite number of invisible universes to explain the one we have, like defenders of the Ptolemaic system desperately adding epicycles when their data doesn't add up. Or again, atheism predicted that human selfhood could be just reduced down to a material substrate, but in fact the best philosophy of mind concedes that the hard problem of consciousness does not go away because we understand more about the brain. And the evidence from quantum physics suggests that consciousness actually plays some constructive role in the formation of reality itself. And finally, atheism in its most confident form especially predicted the disappearance of all religious and mystical experiences. But in fact, those experiences have continued, increased, falling even on non-believers like my colleague here, the intrepid Michael Shermer, who to his great credit has written eloquently about his own peculiar experience with a voice from beyond, which, of course, he would never attribute to God himself. The timer's going off, but I will go this far with him and say that none of the facts I've cited prove the particular truth of any single religious doctrine, but I think they suffice to indicate quite strongly that a renewal of the religious perspective on the world is not just useful, not just sociologically necessary. We should also welcome a religious revival because any society deserves to live in truth, and a religious perspective is just more likely than the alternatives to be true. Thank you.
Michael, you're up. So fun.
I'm taking an extra 30 seconds. Thank you, Barry.
You get it.
Thank you, Free Press. Thank you, FIRE. Two of my three favorite organizations, the third being, of course, Skeptic Magazine. What do I have to say? Does the West need a religious revival? No. Thank you. Oh. All right, let me just make a couple points here before I get to my four main points. One, we're not debating, do you personally need a religious revival? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. That's not what we're debating tonight. And we're debating about the West, not the non-Western world. Are there certain countries that would be better off with Christianity rather than some other religion? Maybe, maybe not. That's not what we're debating tonight. I think we can agree that by the West, we mean the Western industrialized democracies, the vast majority of which have been, for centuries, primarily Christian or Judeo-Christian. And so let me respond to four major claims made about this. One, Christianity is responsible primarily for most of the Western cultural values we cherish: art, architecture, music, literature, science, technology, engineering, and so forth. Okay, so what I'm going to use here is what's called counterfactual causality reasoning. That is to say, let's look to see where that has played out around the world using the comparative method. Let's see if that's the case in this part of the world or some other part of the world, some place in history. Were Homer and Sappho Christians? Were the seven wonders of the ancient world inspired by Christ's great gift of salvation? Clearly, we do know what geniuses in the past have done without Christianity. In the great pre-Christian civilizations of Samaria, Babylonia, Acadia, Assyria, Egypt, and Greece in the West, the ancient civilizations that arose in the Indus Valley, in modern-day Pakistan and India, the Yellow River and Yangtze River valleys in the modern-day China, and many others besides. Every one of these people produced magnificent works of art and architecture, music and literature, science and technology, although I should point out that both Christians and Muslims often did their best to annihilate all evidence of these achievements in innumerable acts of cultural vandalism, pillaging, and censorship. 2, Christianity is responsible for Western democratic and economic values. Well, if true, then societies in which Christianity is or was the dominant religion should show Western-style forms of democracy and capitalism. They don't. The Byzantine Empire, for example, was predominantly Eastern Orthodox Christian from the early AD 300s for over 1,000 years and produced nothing remotely like democracy or capitalism as practiced in modern America. And even early America wasn't anything like modern America, even though it was also Christian, as supposedly our founding fathers were, which is not the case. For 2 centuries, women couldn't vote. Slavery was practiced in this country. Throughout the late Middle Ages and well into the early modern period, all the nation states, city-states, and various political conglomerates of Western and Central Europe were not only Christian, but they were Western Christian, and yet as late as the 19th century, the only quasi-democratic republics with capitalist-like economies in Europe were England, Holland, and Switzerland. All the rest were Christian nations who did not have any of these values. 3, Christianity is the basis for our commitment to equal rights. This is usually grounded in the Apostle Paul's comment in Galatians 3:28. Quote, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female." Oh, I just reread that in the context of modern culture wars. I don't think what he was thinking about what we think about. The key point there is the last clause here. "For ye are all one in Christ." Okay, so Christians imagine that Paul was, transmitting this across the centuries to Jefferson. We wrote the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. I'm afraid not. What Paul was saying here is that you can carry on as you are. If you're Greek, you don't have to become a Jew, which is a significant dispensation given that men at the time had to be circumcised as adults. And that's just the kind of thing that puts a guy off from wanting to. So Paul realized, let the guys keep their foreskin. This is a good thing for, converting people. What he's actually saying is that if you're a slave, you should keep on being a slave. If you're a wife, you must continue being regarded as property. No matter who you are, you can still worship Jesus Christ and be abused by your culture in whatever manner customary for that. Final point. Christianity makes societies healthier and more moral. Okay, simple correlation. Studies done on the 19 Western democracies based on how religious they are, on 6 different questions: how often people pray, how often they go to religious services, and so on. And then societal measures like homicides, suicides, STD rates, abortion rates, pregnancy rates, divorce rates, and so on and so forth. And when you run the correlation, on average, the more religious a country is, the lower its scores on the societal health. And by far and away, America is vastly more religious than any of the other 19 democracies, and they have the highest rates of homicides, suicides, STDs, pregnancies, divorce rates, and so on. If religion was so good for society, then how come it's not working?
Thank you, everyone. Do we need a religious revival? We live in an age of moral confusion, and we're going through a period of identity crisis. It's therefore very important to be clear to end the confusion. What we need in America is a revival of Christianity because it's the foundational creed of our country. America's operating system is Christianity, and when we reject it, we run into trouble. Ross made the point that we have run the experiment of playing clever with this system. Still, a lot of people are confused about the place of Christianity in America and in American history. I suspect that is why tonight's motion is more general than specific, and perhaps why it carries a question mark. We need a Christian revival and a renewal because we've forgotten just how fundamental Christianity is to America's well-being. In 1835, Alexis de Tocqueville observed about America that religion should be considered as the first of their political institutions, for it does not give them the taste for freedom. It singularly facilitates their use of it. Americans so completely confuse Christianity and freedom in their minds that it's almost impossible to have them conceive of the one without the other. They establish missionary churches on the frontiers so that the next generation may be as free as the one from which it has issued, end quote. De Tocqueville was right. Christianity is the operating system on which the very basics of American constitutional morality, politics, culture, and society were built. Even though it is true that Thomas Jefferson is generally remembered as a deist, the creator he was referring to in the Declaration of Independence when he wrote, "All men are created equal," is not Greek or Roman, nor the God of the Quran or the gods of South and East Asia. While taking issue with certain passages of the New Testament, Jefferson regarded the teachings of Jesus as having, quote, "the most sublime and benevolent code of morals which has ever been offered to man." In other words, the creator in the Declaration of Independence is the Judeo-Christian God of the Bible. It is that same creator that Abraham Lincoln invoked to end slavery, the same creator that the suffragettes raised to make their case, as did Martin Luther King in his quest to end racial segregation. Even more explicit was President Franklin D. Roosevelt in his campaign address in Brooklyn, in New York on the 1st of November 1940, when he said, and I quote, "Those forces, communism and Nazism, hate democracy and Christianity as two faces of the same civilization. They oppose democracy because it's Christian. They oppose Christianity because it preaches democracy." And later in 1944, during his D-Day prayer, he said, "Our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity." Ladies and gentlemen, even during the moon landing in 1969, Buzz Aldrin privately took communion on the moon, reading John 15, verse 5. The Apollo Prayer League created microfilm Bibles to be taken to the moon. In short, Christianity is our way of life. It's in our DNA. When we reject our faith wholesale, we turn on each other, we stagnate and we decline, we become weak. We get so confused, we can't tell the difference between good and evil, between men and women. Masculinity becomes at best ambiguous and at worst dysphoric. We get high as a kite, we OD, we self-harm, and we die in droves. In America, when we stay true to our foundational creed, we are unstoppable. We innovate and build. We emancipate and reach for the moon and beyond. We win wars and achieve peace. We trust each other and we flourish. Do we need a religious revival? If by that we mean, do we need a Christian revival? Heck yes.
All right, so I'm an atheist, so that means I didn't really prepare. We don't think a whole lot about the future. We're in the here and the now, am I right, brother? Get some drinks after the show. Maybe have a little indiscriminate sex with some of the single ladies. Who knows? What's to stop us? Also, I just flew here from Vegas, so I feel like I was in training camp for atheists, you know. Penn Jillette was holding the heavy bag, you know. But I do want to say that, you know, I've been an atheist my entire life, but that's just because I was raised with a vacuum of religion, and so religion didn't make sense to me. But I will say this, as an atheist, I do not like it when atheists sort of become religious about being atheists. The whole point is nothing. You get a pentagram tattoo and start wearing eyeliner, chanting in Wiccan, now we're gonna have to part ways. But from a psychological perspective, that's kind of more where I'd like to approach this evening, which is to say, I get religion, and I get what it does, and I get what it attempts to do, and I get the purpose of it. And I think all of that is noble. And I worry about religion the same way I worry about Ozempic. People go, oh, you just take this shot, and all of a sudden you don't like Funyuns anymore. And I go, yeah, but isn't that weakening you as a human being? And they go, no, it's easy. I just do this, and then I don't have to do that. And I'm like, yeah, but what about your own personal agency? What about your ability to make your own decisions, you know? The greatest compliment I ever got in my life was from Dennis Prager, and he's praying for him. I'm just studying the science. But Dennis Prager's a deeply religious man. And he said to me, I said, you know, we're very good friends. And I said, does it bother you that I'm an atheist? And a lot of people would ask him that. And he said, no, not you, Adam. You don't need religion. Which meant I'm naturally righteous. But for me, I want everyone to have agency, and I want them to make the right choices and the right decisions because it's the right thing to do versus the eye in the sky. And I walked here amongst the homeless people, and I saw these guys, and then I saw the safety patrol guys out there in the orange vests, and I thought, I wish we didn't need the guys in the vests. My plan would be to get these guys taken care of, cleaned up, off of drugs, medication, whatever it is they needed, and then we wouldn't need the enforcement. And I think that as a society, that's just a long-term fix versus the Ozempic of the religion. Yeah, you know, I know it sounded like an applause break, but it really wasn't. It just worked. I just put it together. I did work in Burbank, California in 1988, installing closets with a bunch of former gangbangers who became born-again Christians, and they needed it. It's what prevented them from stabbing me with a screwdriver. But I don't want everyone to have to go to prison to find Jesus Christ in order to get out and not kill me in a cube van in Burbank, California. In summation, I just wrote that hoping something would come. In 1835, Alexis de Tocqueville said, screw religion. We don't need it in the United States. And Franklin Roosevelt agreed. Thank you.
Okay, here's where I want to start, Adam, picking up on one of the things you just said, of many amazing things you just said. You want people to just do the right thing.
Yes.
I think everyone on this stage and everyone here and any decent person would agree with that. And I think the question is, can you get to the right thing without God? And what Ayaan especially was arguing is that when you take out that foundational layer, the operating system doesn't work. And I want you maybe, Michael, because you really make this case in the moral arc, you argue that you don't need the God piece of it in order to get to whatever you want to call it, the humanitarian, the moral piece. Make that case for us.
Well, perhaps at one point we did need it in the way Adam said, but not anymore. I mean, just if you look at the rights revolutions, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, and so forth, it's primarily religions that were drug into these revolutions with their teeth in the past and finally came around after the Secular arguments were made using rationality and reason based on Enlightenment arguments about being treated equally under the law and no one's a means to an end but an end in themselves. These are classic Enlightenment philosopher arguments that eventually won the day, that took several centuries. And so if you look at how it was done, had we been having this debate, I don't know, a century and a half ago, we would have all said, oh, slavery's great. It says right there in the Old Testament, and here's all the rational arguments that Southern preachers made and so on. And almost nobody who was religious argued that this was a bad idea. Now, the handful of people like Wilberforce and a few Quakers that were abolitionists, their primary opponents were religious people. They were the religious leaders that said, no, you're wrong. But none of us would think like that now. What has happened? Something has happened. We've all had our consciousness raised, our sense of who belongs in the moral sphere has expanded to more and more people where we don't even think about it. And you could just go all the way up to the gay rights revolution. It was 2011. They were still in the minority support for gay rights. And then after, it's probably the fastest revolution in history, by 2015, the Supreme Court said it's the law of the land. That was the end of the story. And it wasn't religion that got us there. It was secular arguments made by activists. And then religious people said, oh yeah, we always thought that was a great idea.
You guys want to respond to that? Ross?
I mean, I don't want to dispute that people can lead upright lives in which they attempt to do the right thing without belief in God. Obviously, such people exist. I don't dispute that societies can exist at certain moments in time. Scandinavia for 25 years or so, for instance, that seemed to do pretty well under secular conditions. But first, I think Michael's account of American and Western history is deeply flawed. I think it's pretty obvious where, most of the arguments, most of those powerful and successful arguments against slavery came from. And I think there's a reason that if you do a through line in the history of abolitionism down through civil rights, and you hit Wilberforce, you hit Lincoln's second inaugural address, and you get all the way to Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail and the I Have a Dream speech, it's really, really hard to imagine those kind of arguments having the same force absent the deep religious foundation that they obviously had. And yes, the Civil War was effectively a religious civil war between two competing interpretations of Scripture. That's absolutely true. And there's no question that every religious body has arguments and internal struggles, and it's not like becoming religious automatically gives you immediate access to, the fullness of moral truth. But everything that Ayaan said about the actual history of America and the role that Christianity has played in America is true and correct, and is just sort of, it is part of our common heritage. And the larger points that Michael was making, the resolved, there are layers here, right? And I'm a Christian, so obviously, I'm with Ayaan about the particulars of Christianity. But the resolution is about religion, right? And so Michael spent a lot of time saying, oh, people say Christianity is so great, but look at all these amazing civilizations around the world. I hesitate to inform you that all of those civilizations were themselves religious, right? And the experiment in founding a civilization on a disbelief in the distinctiveness of human beings, the absence of a metaphysical horizon for human life, and the absence of a moral law that exists independently of our own consciousness, which, by the way, materialism basically has to deny the existence of entirely as a reality as opposed to just an epiphenomenon. That record just isn't very impressive, and I don't think if you look at the condition of Western Europe or the most secularized parts of the world today, that the prognosis for the next 50 to 100 years is all that impressive. So I will concede, yes, for particular moments, things can go okay without belief in God. But I think the broader portrait of human history and the broader reality suggests that those periods are likely to be evanescent, and I think the one we're living through now is likely to be remembered that way.
I think one of the strongest arguments on this side of the divide is look around, right? When we became unmoored from religion, other things filled the God-shaped hole. And Adam, you're one of the most sort of outspoken charismatic voices on the subject of people having absolutely fucking lost their minds, excuse my French. Do you not see, how do you explain what that's about? How do you explain the sort of obsession with politics? I mean, I was interviewing Alex Karp last night, and he talks about wokeness as a kind of pagan religion. What do you make of, how do you contend with that argument?
Well, many thoughts. So one is, you know, we talk about religion historically, and we talk about all the greats and how that was woven into many famous speeches and, you know, World War II and Lincoln and so on and so forth. I think it's a tougher sell now that we have iPhones and technology to sort of sell the concept of religion to more technically advanced people. You know, I mean, I think it's an easier global sell to a group that is a little more primitive and not sure why that fiery orb in the sun, in the sky burns so bright. You know, now that we're going to the moon and thinking about going to Mars, I just feel like it's a tougher sell. Now, I do agree that somebody said, you know, once you don't believe in religion, you don't believe in nothing, you believe in something, and that's where the woke left sort of comes in with their tribalism and their sort of pagan, sort of ritualistic stuff, which has a lot of notes of religion to it. So I in no way want to come out here and defend some sort of morphed form of religion which turned into left-wing wokeism, because I certainly don't want that. What my vision is with religion is sort of my vision with government. I want a small government. You know, I'd like government to be as small as it can be. I want people to have dominion over their own decisions, and I want to train them to make the right decisions, not through the threat of government or religion, but out of a kind of a moral homeostasis that you just, you know, murder's wrong. You know, I believe in all of the Ten Commandments.
Why is murder wrong?
Well, because now we're starting to, if you want to distill it down, I think anything you don't want, anything you do not wish for yourself to then to perpetrate on somebody else is morally and sort of cosmically wrong, minus the religion aspect of it. And I'll say this, it works this way with pets. You know what I mean? If you put a bowl out for one cat and a bowl out for another cat, and you just remove the other bowl and say yours is gone, the one cat may be upset, but it's not why is it wrong. I think it's baked into nature.
What happens though, let's say you have a stroke and you're lying on the floor and your cat hasn't been fed in a long time. What is your cat, because I obviously you can construct intellectual systems.
Let's not get into this Gene Hackman business, by the way. If this is where you're going, I saw Poseidon Adventure. I'm a huge fan, and if this is where you're going, Ross.
My only point is that I think it is obviously you can construct sort of, you know, cultural forms that make a case against murder. I think the claim that you can find a prohibition on murder in the cosmos or the natural world is a bit harder to justify. But
well, I shouldn't say in the cosmos because that sounds a little out there. I would say.
I mean, I think it's an. I mean,
if you live, if it's a sort of what would you wish for yourself and what wouldn't you wish for yourself, transcends just the human existence. It bleeds into all of God's creatures.
What?
To quote.
I think one of the big aspects of this conversation is the question about religion being utilitarian. right? So Adam, when you're talking about the gangbangers that found Jesus, and thank God they did, because now they're not going to murder you, it's making a kind of, like, religion is good as a tool. And Ayaan, the reason you're on this stage is because last year you wrote a very, very widely read essay, which I imagine is going to become a book, about your conversion to Christianity. And I think it created an enormous, enormous cultural conversation. And I think the most kind of acerbic critics, what they had to say about it was, it wasn't a sincere conversion because the reason for the conversion was a utilitarian one. It was basically, Christianity is a good program, not Christianity is true. And I kind of wanted to throw that out here as part of the conversation because, Ross, in your new book, you argue not just that it's a good program, but that it matters and is effective because it's true. So let's maybe talk a little bit about that, because to me, that's sort of at the heart of this. I think there's a lot of people in the audience who would agree, yeah, we would have been better off had we not discovered atheism, but we did. And so how do we like put that back in the bottle? I'm saying a lot of things, so feel free to jump in. Or we can go back to Gene Hackman, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think both things are true. I became a Christian because I believe that Christianity is true, but I think the proposition that it is, I wouldn't want to use the word utilitarian, but Christian morality is superior to any other kind of morality I've seen. I lived as a Muslim and I lived as an atheist, and I settled on Christianity. And I settled on Christianity because it fulfills a personal spiritual need. I confess I did have a God-shaped hole, and it's gone now. It's filled. So that is the personal story aside. Now, atheism has always existed because it's always been, a perception of the world, nature, the naturalists, people just, the people who don't perceive of God, don't need a God figure, aren't spiritual. We didn't call them atheists. We probably called them naturalists. We had other labels for them, but they always existed. But for this particular discussion, I always want to separate the atheists that I found in the West, nice, wonderful, warm, friendly people, but they
Some of them, I'm sure,
some
are
of
good
them,
people.
Yeah. But they are Christian atheists. You know, everything that Adam said, I just wanted to say, but that's all Christianity. You just set aside, and you grew up with it. And so there's that. There are atheists like Adam and Michael. And then there are hardcore atheists. For instance, the communist atheists. And if you ask yourself the question, is there any society that has adopted atheism as its governing creed? And where can we find them? And I think of places like North Korea. I think of Cuba. I think of the former Soviet Union. I think of China. And I know that the two atheists here on the stage and the atheists that I used to be are very different. But I think what most Westerners forget is that they are products of a Western Christian moral system.
So we're like, you're saying that Adam and Michael are sort of enjoying the fumes of Christianity, even if they can't acknowledge it.
They are non-practicing Christians, yes.
I believe they're non-practicing Jews, but I don't know.
And Jews.
Yeah, Ross, go
Does
ahead.
Michael want to say
Michael,
something
go
before
ahead. You guys are being way too polite. Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, we talk kind of fast.
Well, just a couple of points. So, why is murder wrong? The definition of the word is the wrongful killing of another human being. So essentially you're asking, why is it wrong to be wrong? It's in the definition of the word. What you mean is why is it wrong to kill other people? It's not always wrong to kill other people. Self-defense is a legitimate form of killing somebody else. Killing in a just war is justified. Capital punishment, I happen to be against that, but a lot of people think it's okay. So what we're really talking about is the taking of somebody else's life when they have no autonomy autonomous control over their bodies and they don't want to die, something like that. So our principle is autonomous choice over your life decisions, including to live. And that would include abortion rights or reproductive rights, slavery and freedom, and so on. For 2.5, 3 centuries, we've been basically arguing this is where our moral foundation is. We begin with the autonomous decision of the individual. The individual is the target of our moral concern. And do they have more choice or less choice? Would you rather live in North Korea or South Korea? Would you rather live in East Germany or West Germany before this? Of course. Everybody knows why. Okay, second point. It's not.
But Ayaan would say it's because of Christianity.
No, it's irrelevant. These are orthogonal. North Korea, Soviet Union, so these are not atheistic governments. Atheism is orthogonal to this. These are communist governments. Atheism isn't a thing. It's nothing. Stop making it a worldview. It's just, I don't believe in God, full stop, that's it. What do you believe? In civil rights, in women's rights, in gay rights. I believe in equal treatment under the law. These are positive assertions.
Are these rights you speak of in the room with us right now?
Yes, I think I do.
Where are they?
I do. I argue for natural rights in the sense that, yeah.
But where do they exist? In what form?
Because we decide to make them. Yeah.
Who decides?
We do.
What are we?
We in our constitutions.
No, I mean you and I. Like, what are we? When you've issued a long defense of the reasoning individual making free choices. But yeah. I've read a lot of atheist materialist writers, including some brilliant scientific minds who are serious atheist materialists. And their argument really strongly implies that at the bottom, the thing that you call Michael Shermer is essentially a theatrical illusion imposed upon a set of chemical reactions in your brain. So if that's the case...
Yeah, but that's not my argument.
Okay.
So, yeah, Dawkins isn't here.
That's fair.
I am. And I make the argument that, in fact, we are moral agents. And we are born with, inherit from our ancestors, all the way back to primates, a sense of right and wrong and guilt and shame when we harm others. Why? Because we live as social beings and we have to have some sort of interaction. And if I harm you in some way or threaten to harm you, then it pays for you to respond in some way. And it pays for our group to have a set of rules by which we're going to punish people who don't play nice and so on. And then we inculcate that into our thinking. And this is what's taken so long over the centuries. But again, centuries ago, no one would have given any thought to the kinds of things, or they would have given a lot of thought to the kinds of things that never even enter our imaginations. How should you treat women or Jews or blacks or whatever? Our moral sphere is expanded to include those as honorary members of our in-group. And that in-group has gotten much larger. How did that happen? I'm arguing not religion. It's these kind of arguments from rationality based on these Enlightenment ideas of equal treatment, the principle of interchangeable perspectives, bodily autonomy, and so on. And we've just slowly, maybe by decade levels have changed. You can hardly see it. But if you look back like at novels from the 1950s and the way they talk about Jews and women and blacks, it's embarrassing. No novelist would write like that. Well, maybe some would, but most wouldn't. And why is that? Because we all had our consciousness raised through television scripts and films and novels and books and everything. And we've all changed. And I'm arguing it's not religious pulling us in that direction. Religion's being pulled by these forces.
I think it's quite wrong. I think the account you're giving of atheism is just wrong, because the leaders of the Soviet Union explicitly banned religion and based it on atheism. And so does China to this day. They persecute any believers in any faith. And the same in Northern Korea. So I think the proposition that there is no society that is based on actual atheism, I think that proposition is wrong. It is based on atheism, and we have seen the results. And I've already made the case, but I think it bears repeating to say, all of these things that you talk about, such as slavery and segregation and the oppression of women's rights, all of these were argued. And here I think it's important to make it clear that it was done in the realms of Christianity using biblical arguments to make, we are created in the image of God, the dignity of human beings, and that is why you don't find slavery was a universal practice in history and still goes on in other countries. And you look at the story of the abolition of slavery, and it's done first in the West, and it's the West then that exported it to other countries. And I think that sort of, I mean, if we're going to have a debate on this, then at least we should agree on the factual account of.
Let me just take up Barry's question about the deep truth issue here and try and connect it to Ayaan's argument, right? I think you can see the conflict between atheism and theism as fundamentally a conflict about what is the primary fact in the universe, mind or matter, right? Does mind come first or does matter come first? If mind comes first, you don't have to be a Christian, but you do have to be some sort of theist or at the very least some kind of pantheist. If you say matter comes first, then you're going to have a very hard time explaining why minds are actually meaningful agents in the world with the kind of rights and dignity and capacities that are ascribed to them by our debating partners. The points I made very briefly in my opening remarks were to suggest I think we have a lot of data from science, philosophy, and human experience, especially over the last 200 years, under conditions of increasing secularism, to make the case that mind has a primary role in the universe. This helps explain why the universe at the highest level, seems designed with human beings in mind. It explains why we, coming up from below in our consciousness, are capable of doing the things that Adam was talking about. How do you build the iPhone? How do you go to Mars or the moon if you don't have confidence that the universe is regular and consistent and mathematically beautiful and made for us to discover? These two things connect, and they also help explain the resilience and persistence of religious experience, which I, as a weirdo supernaturalist, think is an underrated argument for the truths of religion. So where does that get you? Again, it doesn't get you to dogmatic truths of any particular faith, but it gets you to the point where Ayaan comes in and says, okay, if there probably is a God, then it's reasonable to look around the world. You know, there's a bunch of big religious traditions. It's entirely reasonable to say, okay, out of that range of religious traditions, I will throw in my lot with the one that seems to have played a nurturing role in the civilization that I love and that I value and cherish. That's not a mistake that somehow contradicts the deeper claims of religion. That's a rational response to a reality that should impel all of us towards some kind of religious belief. And I will just say again, I think the perspectives of our debating partners, the admirable moralism that they display, itself depends not per se on any specific religious teaching, but on a broader perspective on what human beings are that only makes sense if you assert that mind is primary. Consciousness is actually the primary thing in the universe, and actually everyone in this room knows it because that is your immediate experience right now. Every single person in this room listening to me talk is having a supernatural experience, whether you realize it or not.
Explain that. Because somehow, Ross, you have not mentioned the word God in that entire beautiful soliloquy.
Because God is the appropriate name to give to the primary, no, not to that experience, no, to the primary form of mind and consciousness that we should reasonably hold responsible for our entire existence and for our personal existences. This is what does being made in the image of God mean? It means fundamentally that your consciousness, in a more limited way, participates in the same rational and creative power that set the whole universe in motion. What do I mean by supernatural? The claim that you exist and that you, as a self-identifying conscious agent, have power to make your hands move, to make decisions in the world, is already a supernatural claim, which is why when you push down through atheism, through materialism, you get to like Robert Sapolsky and people denying that free will even exists, right? But we know free will exists. We do.
You have no choice.
Adam?
I mean,
I'd love to see where Adam is going to go with this.
Well, I have a few thoughts. I mean, what we're sort of dancing around here is something need to be bestowed upon us, or does it fall under the heading of no shit? You know, and I've always thought part of evolving, whether it be us or a pod of whales, is to kind of do the right thing. You have to teach the calves how to hunt. You have to keep the predators away. And you go, well, what is inducing or compelling that mother whale to do that? And it behooves the species. It's part of evolution. You know, many of the things that are in the Bible are things that would help the species naturally, you know? So it's hard to parse out exactly what is baked in terms of natural evolution for all mammals and beyond, you know, versus scripture and words being passed down. One of the subjects we sort of missed on because we were talking about Christianity a lot, but there's a lot of different religions. And one of the problems with having a lot of different religions is sometimes they don't get along. And then there becomes killing in the name of and lots of destruction. You know, much of this is going on in the Middle East and other parts as we speak, but there's a sort of you're either for me or against me mentality of a lot of religions, and if you're against me, then you may need to be eliminated. So if we're going to get a lot of Eagles fans and Steelers fans and Ravens fans in the same bar, there's going to be a lot of people getting the shit beat out of them at some point.
Maybe another way to say Eagles fans is Islam, a word that has not been mentioned on stage tonight.
Islam, fly.
Now, Ayaan has filled in the word Christian in the proposition. If the word, but it's religion, right? And Islam is experiencing boom times.
Exactly, yeah. So Islam is experiencing a boom time, even Hinduism is experiencing is stable. What other religions are there? Buddhism is in decline.
But if the proposition, Ayaan,
are you trying to divide us?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to say it's not any religion, I imagine, that you would believe needs a revival.
I think this room is full of people tonight because they care about the revival of Christianity. It is about the moral crisis we are going through, the despair, the rise in crime and grime. We're going through something and we know it. And the question is, yes, has religion got something to do with that? And I think we all agree the answer is yes. And I like to be very specific and very clear to say, but which religion are we talking about? And I've been in the West for 30 years. And in the last 30 years, I don't think any religion other than Christianity has had any trouble or any inhibition about presenting itself and talking about itself and expanding. It's only been Christianity that, for whatever reason, has been pushed out of the public system, public space. It's been ridiculed. That has been, and I think we're realizing we're now living in, I don't want to say a post-Christian world, but for many people, it feels like a post-Christian world, especially if you go to Europe. And that's why it's not a criticism, but I wish that the proposition we're debating here tonight were more specific, where we would say, do we need a Christian revival in the West? And that's also why I underscore that it is this Judeo-Christian, it's a biblical foundation that set up this country and that spawned this civilization. And that's the debate we should be having, but we're not going to be divided because
I mean, I will both say, as a Christian, that I wholeheartedly endorse my partner's call for a specifically Christian revival, but I would also say that I would defend the resolution on more general terms. Of course, there are specific forms of religion that I would not wish to see revived in the United States. I would not wish to live under the rule of the Islamic State. I would not wish to see a revival of Aztec human sacrifice, and so on down, don't laugh, and so on down that list, right? But if you're asking me, is there a form of Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam or my ancient enemy, Protestantism even, right, that I would prefer to see sort of ascendant in civilization, as opposed to where I do think
sort of post-Christian secularism is going, then yeah, the answer is yes. I would rather see not the form of Islam that Ayaan encountered and that still persecutes her today. I would not obviously like to see that form of Islam in charge of Europe, but I would sooner see a version of Islam in charge of Europe than a despairing, pessimistic, nihilistic perspective on the world.
You're losing your partner right now.
I mean, I would rather, I think, yeah, not to sound like a big liberal, but I would rather see the relatively tolerant Islam of, 13th century Spain than despair. Yes, I would take rival religions over despair, and I do think despair, not for the gentleman on stage, but I do think despair is the endpoint of the view that the universe is fundamentally meaningless. I think it's really hard to escape that.
Let's talk about the despair and the alienation and the ennui, because the premise of this side is that is because of the falling away of religion and the meaning of it. I'm being crude about it. But there's so many things that you could attribute that to. The technological revolution, the changing of family structure, the fact that we're bringing back the harem, or at least I hear that's true for some very powerful people. Do you guys buy the idea that the despair that people are feeling is coming from?
No. First of all, we need to point out, we're talking about the rise of the nuns, the people with no religious affiliation. Oh my God, there's so many of them. It's 25%. 25%, that means 75% have religion. We're not exactly living in Gomorrah here in America, right?
I think Ross would
didn't Adam just come back from Vegas?
And belief in God, plummeted from 90% to 75%.
Where do you think the despair is coming from?
Well, okay, so no, this is a testable hypothesis. Is it that there's more teen angst and cutting depression and all that stuff because of the lack of religion? The social scientists who study this, like Gene Twangy or Jonathan Haidt, I've asked them on the podcast, do you think it could be lack of religion? No, there's no data to show that. It's social media, it's screen time, it's coddling, parenting. And, they have half a dozen hypotheses. Lack of religion is not one of them because there's no data to show this. It's just an anecdote. It seems like religion declined. It seems like these other bad things happen, but it's not true.
I think the uptick in despair is connected to a couple of things. I feel it's more physical than it is spiritual, although it ends up being spiritual, which is we were meant to go out and work and be on our feet and sweat and be with nature and work on a farm and mend fences. And men and women had different roles, but there were roles, and they involved getting up in the morning, and they involved movement and sweat, and it involved an engagement. You had to sort of be careful or you'd lose your arm from an axe, when you were building. And we took, in the last 10 minutes, everyone, and we put them in a cubicle, and we fired air conditioning at them, and we told them to do data entry on a computer, and we started eating our own brains. I mean, they have studies that say, all the kids on Prozac and all the meds and stuff, hiking and classical music work better than all the serotonin reuptake inhibitors you can ingest. So we're having... You watch, Little House on the Prairie, no one was depressed. Everyone was miserable, but no one was depressed. And it's a disease of narcissism. We're spending too much time on our phones reading comments about ourselves. We're not wired for this. There's whether you're going, eye in the sky or you're going full Darwin, we're not made to be doing what we're doing. We're made to be on our feet, moving, sweating, and with purpose, creating something. So I think it's a lack of tangible physical activity that has now given way to this despair.
So it's not that we need to bring back God or traditional religion.
Hold on, they're clapping.
We need to get, come on! Thank you. it's not that we need to bring back God or traditional religion, it's that we need to get rid of smartphones and get outside.
Yes, you need to have agency over yourself. Little practices. Shut your phone off and don't bring it in, to the room you may be working in or having a conversation in. I work every day in a studio. I'm in there for 2 hours a day, and I've never brought my phone inside of the studio just because I don't even want to see it. And we're not going to be able to outsource this. We're going to have to sort of internalize it. We invented a treadmill because about 30 years ago, people figured out we're not walking to wells and we're all getting fat. So we sort of created a simulation of exercise that we could do, at our home. And we need to start going there spiritually and emotionally as well. This sedentary life of reading about ourselves, this narcissistic rock tumbler we're in is what is causing, mixed with a lot of, who knows, chemicals, plastics and everything. Everybody under 40's on a bunch of prescription meds. It's a perfect bouillabaisse for this kind of depression. I'm getting hungry. Been up here for a while.
Okay, Ayaan, last thing, and then we're going to go to
I want to say,
statements.
yes, there is there are a number of complex factors that lead to despair. And of course, technology, smartphones and all of that, we've said enough about that. But there is data emerging, for instance, from Jonathan Haidt, looking at young people, where he sees that teenagers that live in Christian homes, conservative homes, where there's a sense of community, where church attendance is high, that even though they're exposed to the exact same factors, cell phones, other screens, etc., they are less likely to present anxiety, depression, suicide. He looks especially at young women, young girls. And so there is that data emerging, and I think it's too soon now to conclude that I'm being careful citing this data because the cell phones existed only, less than 2 decades? Yeah, so to make that statement is I just want to be a little bit more careful, but I do want to say that looking and building what Jonathan Haidt has found, I'm very optimistic about, and I think that's also the reason why there's a lot of conversation about religious revival. And we don't only see it in Christian homes. Even when you look at Muslim homes and other religions, Hinduism, for instance, in families, I'm sorry now.
No, now we're on the, we're reconverging.
Yeah. Where there is an emphasis on family life, on community, on vocation, the likelihood of despair is much less than where there is just plain atheism.
Okay, we're going to put 2 minutes on the clock, and we're going to start with Ross, and then we're going to go in the exact same order that we began in. Ross, bring it home.
So I have I don't even have
Get up
picture.
There, get up
Oh,
there.
up there. Oh,
yeah, why not?
Sorry. Oh, okay, wait. Hang on, let me find. So let's just say something about the iPhone, since it keeps coming up. And Adam made the argument that it's important to thinking about the future, that it was fine to believe in a sky god once upon a time, but in the age of this marvelous technology, surely that can't be a possibility. I think one of the reasons we're here having this conversation, one of the reasons why we were winning in the initial vote, we'll see how things go in the end, is precisely that this technology has made people more aware of many of the issues that make a religious perspective on the world understandable and worthwhile. Some of those are the practical sociological issues that we've all been wrangling over and talking about, and that Ayaan ended by discussing. Just the reality that the technology itself is having a deranging effect, but it's also having an especially acute effect because it's being dropped into a world relatively shorn of senses of community and meaning and purpose. That's part of it. The other thing is that this is like a portal for the demonic, right? In ways that everybody recognizes, even if they don't believe in literal demons, right? There are experiences that people have in the wilds and weirdness of the internet
that impel them towards religion out of a kind of revulsion at not the sort of, material and natural and ordinary forms of the world, but just the deep strangeness lurking when you go, when you just sort of go out there on your own. And this is where I'll end, and maybe this isn't quite the right way to bring it home, but just to bring the two of us, Ayaan and I, perfectly together, right? I think we're going to get some kind of, we'll call it a spiritual revival in America, whether we like it or not. But that spiritual revival could take a lot of different forms. It could involve people looking for small g gods, worshiping the machine god of Silicon Valley, embracing the guideposts offered in psychedelic retreats and so on. And the case for institutional religion, traditional religion, and ultimately Christianity is that there are a lot of worse things, in fact, than the friendly atheism of our interlocutors out there in the dark. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll close where I began, that I think this is a testable hypothesis. Is religion doing good or bad or whatever? Again, not for you personally, but just on average for societies. And again, where I kind of blew through those studies, you can look it up yourself. Just go to our World in Data and just look at all the different statistics for any of the top, say, 25 industrialized democracies in the world. And just look at their homicide rates, suicide rates, STD rates, abortion rates, pregnancy rates, marriage rates, divorce rates. You can get all that data yourself, and then go to a Pew or Gallup or anybody that has been keeping track of religiosity rates, again, based on half a dozen criteria that social scientists who study religiosity. Do you have a Bible in the book in the home? How many times do you pray? And so on and so forth. And you just look at the correlation. So you can't, as a scientist, say, well, but there's this one, North Korea, it's bad and they're atheists. That's not science. That's just cherry-picking anecdotes. What we want to know is, what does the overall trend show? On average, is it good or bad? So, and again, my argument is that over the centuries, we've largely replaced religious-based arguments for why we should be good or moral and not bad or evil with rational arguments. Here are the reasons why. And of course, it was Plato that first pointed out that this is where you begin. Whether there is a God or not, shouldn't you be basing how you treat other people regardless of what the deity said, just because that's a good thing to do? And is it only because the deity says it's right or wrong? Or is there a reason why? And why won't he just give us the reason and then we can skip the middleman, right? This is the Euthyphro problem. So, okay, so that's on the testable idea. The things about mind, where does mind come from? Well, it's an emergent property of the material of the brain. We know this. Now, there's a dozen different theories about the hard problem of consciousness, but God did it is not one of them, because it's not a testable hypothesis. It doesn't explain anything, or it does, but it's a bad explanation. So in the end, I think I would encourage you to, when you vote no. We don't need a religious revival. We need a revival in reason and rationality and morality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
When you vote, please look at 3 factors. One is look at societies that are run or have been run on atheism and make up your minds. 2, look at post-Christian Europe and post-Christian America, or at least the parts that are post-Christian, and look at the despair, the mental health crisis, the rise in crime, the tyranny, the family breakdowns, the weaknesses in spirituality. Remember 2024, the spring of 2024, when the temples of reason and rationality, the most celebrated universities in America, were filled up with our young people who couldn't tell the difference between right and wrong. And then finally, as you're making up your minds, please do not forget that, yes, religions are important, but Christianity really is the operating system of this country and this civilization. And when it retreats and recedes, Look at what happens, and look at when it comes back and the best parts of it, when we thrive and grow and innovate and build, and base your decision on that. Thank you.
In summation, I don't think we're really having an argument or a debate tonight about where we want to end up as a nation and where we want our children to end up morally, spiritually, and beyond. I think we all want to end up in the same place. The question is what's the best vehicle to get us to that place? And for me, I had applause break written down. No. My problem with religion is oftentimes it can give you an out, whereas if it's internalized, the morality, you can't get an off-ramp, meaning at some point somebody said, look, you can bring your dog to the airport and take your dog with you on a flight, but it has to be a service dog. And everyone went, gotcha. And then we had a bunch of nutty women going to their doctors, getting vests for their dogs, and now there's dog shit at the airport. They beat us on a technicality. But a righteous and moral person, dog owner, like myself, would never dream of taking my 110-pound lab, Phil, with me to LAX. Not because I couldn't win on a technicality. I do know Dr. Drew, and he would write me a prescription. But because morally it's the wrong thing to do, and I made that decision.
This night had so much, didn't it? Gene Hackman, demons, bouillabaisse. I don't even know where we're landing. Okay, time to pull out, I don't know if we're deciding it's a machine god or a demon. Time to pull out your iPhone, which came up a lot tonight, and decide who won tonight's debate. And you're going to do it by, this time, texting vote 2 to the number on the screen. Now, if you want to vote for our lovely Christian friends, you're going to text vote A for yes. The West, yeah, pray it up. Throw up some prayers. The West needs a religious revival. Text A if you agree with that. Or if you're with Adam and Michael, text B for no. The West does not need a religious revival. It needs a revival of reason. Okay, as you do that, a few thank yous. Tonight would not have been possible without a few very, very wonderful people. So first, thank you to my colleagues at the Free Press, Ali Sandler, Ellie Stein, Joey Grimmer, and Isaac Grafstein for producing tonight's incredible event. Also from the Free Press, Marissa Harari, Sean Fisher, Kara Boyer, Yana Kozlowski, Aaron Otwell, and the rest of the Free Press team. Finally, an enormous thank you to FIRE for their partnership and for their generous support. Greg, Alicia, Nico, Malvi, Ashley, and Bridget, I want you guys to stand up so that we can acknowledge you. There they are. Do not despair, civil libertarians. The ACLU has fallen, but FIRE is rising out of the ashes. You can go find them in the lobby, and then for those of you who come to the after party, they will corner you and talk to you about all things FIRE. It's an incredible organization, and I want you to get to know them. Last but not least, before we tabulate the votes, favorite biblical character or book that you've read recently that you want to recommend to the crowd? Ayaan, let's start with you.
My favorite biblical character?
Sure.
At the moment is Jacob.
Why Jacob?
He's cunning. He's human. He sins. God catches him in the act, corrects him. He does it again. He's a very interesting, very complex character.
Ross?
I mean, there's so many. No, let's say Doubting Thomas, because as you can tell from the arguments I've tried to press tonight, while obviously I do think that blessed are those who have believed without seeing, I also think it's reasonable sometimes to say to God, show me the wounds, let me put my finger in them, and so on. And I think that generally both individual lives and the universe itself delivers more evidence to the Doubting Thomases of the world than perhaps some people in our society tend to assume.
Michael Shermer.
I was going to pick Doubting Thomas. That was my guy. All right, I'll go with Adam.
You can have Lazarus.
I'll go with Adam. Oh, Lazarus. Oh, yeah. All right. Raised from the dead. Okay. I'm hoping for it. The afterlife, I'm for it. Adam, because he did what his sweetheart told him to do.
Last but not least, the Adam on stage.
I'll go Charlton Heston.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, it is time to see who changed the most minds and won tonight's debate. Whoa! Because Adam and Michael changed more minds, they are the winners of tonight's debate. They had an uphill climb. Thank you guys all so much for joining us. We so appreciate it.